So our next speaker is Dr. Rob Salvino. Dr. Salvino is the director of the Grant Center for Real Estate, and to my knowledge, not a FIFO. He's also with the Ammons Family Endowed Professor of Free Enterprise with CCU's Wall College of Business. He developed and continues to expand the real estate program at Coastal Carolina University. I've known Rob for about 10 years, a frequent guest on my TV show back when they let me have a TV show, and he did a great job kind of explaining tough economic issues to us. So without any further ado, Dr. Rob Salvino.
I want to remind everybody it is Lenten season. Church I attend, first time ever, it's not a Catholic church, they decided to do Lent this year. Actually have a huge celebration of Lent. And so we had to decide what we wanted to give up. I had no idea what I should give up for Lent because I've never really done it. A lot of Catholic friends are doing it all the time. I just never think about it. So I just gave up. I said, I'm done. It's been a difficult year. I actually gave up negativity. No lie. I Googled, what should I give up? Negativity. I'm an economist. We'll see how this works. My son said, Dad, you failed every single day. And I don't even talk about economics when I'm at home. So I don't know what he's talking about. All right, so let's get started. So I like to start my talks like this. If I talk to a group every year, I can go back to what I did, especially if it's once a year. I can go back to exactly what we were talking about that point in time 1 year ago. So last year, these are two of the slides that were on my presentation for this summit. The one on the left was the first slide. The one on the right was the last slide. On the left, if you can't see, is the ports. Ports all around the world, really. But what happened after COVID is the internet of everything, technology of everything, people getting stuff from their homes shipped to them, right? And then on the bottom left is a nice little house in Queens, New York, which I've been to several times, with the snow, right? An older piece of housing stock that people have to continually work on, right? Just to keep the heat going. That's Queens. Beside that is a big old pile of money, right? That's also something that happened after COVID. And then there's a little chicken. People really found they wanted to eat meals from restaurants in their home, right? And on the right, though, is what we sell here. And this is what brought so many people. They realized, you mean I can move to Myrtle Beach with my cell phone and my laptop and work for whoever I've been working for my entire career? And that happened in a big way. And I'll just tell you one thing. I've been doing this job for probably, 11 or 12 years. Actually, the part of speaking in the region, not just being a professor, but this part of the job. And as I'm listening to the people speak, and I knew this day was going to be different than every summit we've ever had because the panel and the speakers we put together, this whole thing's full circle. And I just want to say Clay was responsible for getting Kobe to do WALF this year. Then I was able to speak for WALF. And I've been listening a lot. So I learned, contrary to what many people think, I don't so much like to speak and talk, although I do a lot of it. I love to listen. And I think that's what's kept me in this position for so long, because I know a lot of people who have done it. They've lasted a few years, and then they leave, because there's a lot of stuff that comes with it that maybe we'd rather leave alone, right? But I love to listen to people, and I get to listen to so many people who have wisdom from all parts of things that we do. So before I get into these slides, I'm going to say one thing before I forget. I had somebody speak to my students yesterday with Principal Financial Group, large company, headquartered in Des Moines, Iowa. Trent Burney's in the room. He's going to work for them in June. And he said, hey, I'm going to tell you folks one thing, students. Don't just be an analyst. And I'll extend that. Don't just be a broker. Don't just be a fundraiser. Don't just be a professor, a banker, a builder, whatever it is. You are responsible for building this entire region. That's what you do. You're going to help turn this into what all the speakers who have been up here have said we can be. And then the next thing is believe. Believe that now. That's great wisdom. Just listening to that, I sat there and have digested that and thought, thank God I've got slides that'll keep me going and where I'm supposed to go. Otherwise, I get off on a total tangent. And that's why these events, these forums are so important. All right. On the right, though, last year, a year ago today, basically, expansion is slowing and moves to tame inflation are building. That was a year ago. Now, the Fed has moved the rates upward 8 times just since we met the last time. I think the first one had just started. So it went from a quarter to 4.55 to 4.75 now is the target. The next point says geopolitical risk is increasing. That's still the case, right? Not much has really changed on that front. The next one says overheating and uncertainty are similar to pre-COVID period. Before COVID hit, most economists were saying, this thing's gonna pop soon. We can feel it. There is a recession coming. And then the shock of all shocks, literally the shock of all shocks, right, came. And we're still experiencing, I would say, the euphoria from what came after COVID, right? And then the last point says, yet inflation has emerged and lingers, budget conservatively, right? Egg prices, fuel prices, everything else. That's how you know it's inflation. It's not just this or that or the other. It's every single, including wages, right? Wages are a price to economists, no different than any other price. And they've all gone up. Now they're all either stabilizing, coming down a little. Some things lag and wages finally come up in certain things, right? But that's where we are. The economy, what do we know? What do we remember? The world, inflation in Western economies. There's higher inflation in European countries than there is in the United States. And we've never seen this kind of inflation since late 70s, early 80s. The US, first year-over-year home price decline nationally since 2012. Just hit February data, right? Important to think about. South Carolina and the region, in migration. It is our story. It is our lifeblood. If you have kids who played sports, interesting conversation with Gary Loftus about women's sports versus men's sports or girls versus boys and the sports tourism. My child grew up in that, one of my children, right? A soccer player, a female soccer player. Charleston, Columbia, Florence, Greenville, Wilmington. It's all the same to me. What field are we playing on, right? You're in a different place every single day. And you meet so many people from up north who are down here. It is part of our entire fabric, right? Do our experiences here converge or diverge from the greater economic conditions of the nation? For example, single family versus multifamily. This is a real estate center at the core that's putting this on. We are a single family destination. We have been. Multifamily is starting to really pop up. Things have shifted over the last several years. In-migration versus out-migration. If you talk to people from maybe San Francisco or Washington or certainly the whole entire New England region of the United States, their story is very different. They are losing people to the entire Sun Belt, right? There was a provost who came to our university the same year that I came in 2007, came from Toledo, Ohio, and he said, I can tell you what, it's a heck of a lot better to be at a university in a state that is growing as opposed to one that is declining. And we should all take great thanks in that, right? But how should we prepare long-term versus short-term? In the short run, we are all thinking something is happening, right? And it may be difficult for a time. So how do we prepare? This time last year, this is a little picture of it. This is the Fed rate. The red line, if you can see it, last year's summit, federal funds rate was basically at the bottom. And this is how much we've increased since then. And anybody who talks about interest rates would have some questions and want to know how fast and how high can they go before it literally does pop the balloon. And we're sitting here like we were in 2007, 2008, 2009, 10, 11, and finally 12, we started to emerge from that. Fortunately, on our panel today, we have someone who has spent much more time looking at the banking sector than I have, Mr. Joe Moglia. If he's not in the room yet, he will be here, and I look forward to sitting again and listening to someone who can speak something that I can really just read about and talk to other people about. I'm very curious for his perspective. Federal funds rate historical. If you can see the shades, those are recessions that almost always come on the backs of extreme hiking interest rate environments, right? The last one was, I think that is 2015 to 2020, which again is when we were thinking before 2020 hit, this is probably going to come down, right? And then we extended it. There was a study that predicted the federal funds rate needs to be 7%. It was at, I think, 0 or a quarter, maybe, a quarter, when the study came out in May of last year. It's called the Taylor Rule. And basically, economists that are interested in this try to predict how far will the Federal Reserve go when it shifts its mission to controlling economic expansion and pulling back an overheating economy. And 7 was the expectation of what it should be. Today, we're at 4.5 to 4.75. It's expected there'll be 2 more quarter-point increases. It would take us from 5 to 5.25. Just last week, I was speaking to the city of Myrtle Beach at their budget retreat, and the banking collapses had literally happened a couple days before I was planning to go talk about the economy. And we got into a conversation. I think a lady named Michelle was sitting at the table, is on maybe the council, I'm not sure. And we were discussing whether or not this was a few isolated banks, or if this could start hitting other banks that maybe we've never heard of, right? Some of these other ones, they're very big banks, right? And then today, more news dropped. I haven't even had time to read about it because I think I was in a room when I heard about it. Deutsche Bank. Something is going on with Deutsche Bank. I don't even know what it is, so I won't even speak about it. So this is kind of a scary time for finance. Fed balance sheet. So I'm talking interest rates. There's a whole other thing that goes on as well, right? And this is either quantitative easing or quantitative tightening. What you can see across the whole entire slide is quantitative easing, which is expansion of money. $4.5 trillion just during the COVID period. $4.5 trillion. $4.5 trillion in perspective. Our personal income in the whole entire United States was $19 trillion before COVID hit, $19 trillion. So $4.5 trillion was unleashed into the economy right after COVID hit. The quantitative tightening that has happened on the back of that is nearly insignificant compared to the quantitative easing that preceded it. So that's something to keep in mind as far as being able to fight inflation in any way other than a full-on recession, right? 30-year mortgage rates, the realtors in the room, the bankers, the builders, everyone is quite familiar with what's happened with the 30-year mortgage rate. I want to show, just as a reminder, what that looks like in terms of the effects. So this is our regions. This is monthly on top, closed sales. On the far, so this is each one is a year. You can see the cycle. You can see the cyclical nature of our home sales in the region, right? So from 2013 on the left through the present, if you look on the last 2 years, you can see a significant overall decline in home sales, directly correlated to the mortgage rate. On the bottom is the rolling 12-month, one since 2003 and one again since 13. New homes are a little different because builders, particularly large builders, have some opportunity to work with things that existing home sellers don't. New builders can create some incentives, some other offers. They can buy down mortgage rates. And one study, I think it was John Burns Real Estate Consulting nationally, said the effect on average of a lot of these builders with the benefits they've thrown in to kind of sweeten the deal to make it continue to go is about a 16% drop in price. A 16% drop in price on average nationally on new homes. Existing owners can't really do that, right? Can't make it look like a price drop. They just have to drop the price. So many people have said, I'm not going to sell. Because in this strange economic environment, most people don't actually, with unemployment so low for those working and owning homes, they don't really need to sell. It's if I want to sell, I'll sell. But then where would I go? And why am I going to put myself into a 6.5% interest rate if I'm sitting in a 3, right? That's a conversation people are having. New home prices, new and existing. So we have seen just at the end a little bit of decline, but some of it is seasonal in nature. Month-to-month declines always happen. The question is year over year. And even in Myrtle Beach, as the nation declined on average, Myrtle Beach still had a 4% increase in prices the last month of data compared to the previous year, same month. So we generally lag a little bit. Again, smart people in this room, people who are in this every day, have been looking at data for years, your consultants, your brokers, your bankers, and I learned that immediately when I came to Myrtle Beach. Look to Florida, look to the rest of the Sun Belt, and then look to the nation. We usually are a little bit behind in what happens. This is why it's important to consider what's going on in the bigger picture, as we at the same time consider how we're different. This is the United States existing home sales situation. This is January or February 2022 through the present, most recent data. It's just a significant decline in activity. At some point, you have to realize that the decline in activity is a decline in income for people that make their money off of that activity. And there's an awful lot of people in the United States that make their income off of this, right? So it's something to keep in mind. The numbers here, 6.4 million on the top left, 4 million on the bottom. It's 2.5 million less homes sold across that period of 1 year, right? 2.5 million in the nation. U.S. home prices, S&P Case-Shiller. This is the 20 largest metros in the United States index. This should be a repeated sales index. So it is not just whatever homes sold, because in COVID, sometimes certain homes are selling to people who have more wealth. That, of course, elevates the price. If we take out lower income folks and lower priced homes, certainly the average would be moving up. But repeated sales is that house sold 3 years ago. How much did it sell for today when it sold, right? That's the question. So the Case-Shiller is showing a decline in year-over-year home sale prices, right? Another thing to keep in mind. But how does this cycle compare with the previous cycle? That cycle was from 2002 to 2006, that expansionary phase, and then we had the recession. Compare that to the last 2 years. So from 2002 to 2006, there was massive speculation in housing, lot flipping. I honestly, as economists, believed, I told my students, you're not even going to, HGTV is going to be a canceled channel, right? Fortunately, I was wrong, but I'm pretty sure I believed it if I'd have went back in time to look at that, right? Nobody's going to be doing that stuff anymore, right? Fortunately, it is a good, viable business to be in. My daughter wants to do it herself for people, first-time home buyers. I think it's pretty neat. With fundamentals, right? But that kind of speculative action is not happening as it was back then. Loose underwriting, Countrywide is an example. I have a hat that I wear. I think it's Washington Mutual. Every time I put it on, I just laugh because it doesn't exist anymore. It's one of those, I don't even know where I got it from, a golf outing or something like that. And public policy from 2002 to 2006, really from much earlier than that, was pushing home ownership harder, like the HOPE program. That was all we talked about from 2002 to 2006, getting people to buy their home. How perverse in the United States, all of those who would talk about the American dream, the strength of our property rights, that today the general conversation is getting everybody to believe we should be renting instead of owning. It is a very interesting thing. I don't know if everybody hears it, but I speak a lot with the Appraisal Institute. And again, I get to listen to some pretty big builders talk about the business models changing, build for rent, different things. A lot of neighborhoods in this town, right? That push is very different from what was happening from 2002 to 2006 as well. So the last 2 years, the COVID shock, obviously, lifestyle, mass exodus from high cost and lower quality of life regions of the United States. This is true throughout the whole entire country. Technology adoption catapult sustains the exodus, right? The questions, the debates with Google or Microsoft or whatever about Should we bring all these folks back to work? Do I like this? Do I not like this? It doesn't really matter. Those are kind of higher level questions. The fact is many more people are able to do this, and many employers are quite willing to accept it and promote it, right? So that is not going to change. Retirees are a larger share of population. This is the most interesting statistic. I check it every time I give a talk to make sure I'm not wrong, right? 29% of the population in 2019 is 55 plus people over 55 or more. In 2005, it was 22%. What's the difference between 22% and 29%, and the difference in population? It's 30 million more people are 55 plus today than in 2005. 30 million, all right? 30 million, and a heck of a lot of those people are concentrated in the Northeast and want to move to Myrtle Beach, right? So the sustainability, Ethel, think about that. Think about that dynamic, right? It doesn't really change much. It's the way it's been, right? This is what's been happening, and we're quite aware of it, long term. This is a picture of that. This is a different way of looking at a population pyramid. It's from the left to the right. As you go down, you get very older. The down is 85 and over at the bottom, so the top should be under 5, all right? In the big mass of what this population pyramid has become is the one bar that's inside is actually Gen X, my age, is right in there. We're the smallest population, 5-year population group in the nation aside from those over 80. So the question is, how sustainable is the 55 plus boom? It is quite sustainable. We live longer. There are plenty of people filling in where they are aging up. So this long-term perspective is not ending anytime soon for our region. My notes on this one. The aging population keeps growing. Gen X is smaller, but more positive on life. This is true. Pew Research has been tracking the baby boomers for like 25 years. They're very negative. You guys are very negative. Why is that, right? What is it about that? But it's true. I talked to my mom for a little bit, and then I leave and say, holy cow, I gave up that for Lent, right? So we're very positive, the Gen Xers. We're going to come here whether we have the wherewithal or not. We're going to the beach because we believe we can, right? That's it. So don't worry about the small bar. They're coming anyway, right? More of us will buy the beach. We earned it. Rick Pitino, I think, said that. I earned it. I love that quote. That's fantastic from Rick Pitino. All right. What about similarities in the cycles? Monetary contraction, quantitative tightening, interest rates up. This has happened in both of these cycles. Bank collapses, is it contained? Again, I'm really looking forward to listening to the perspective of Mr. Moglia, Coach Moglia, on the panel. Stock market decline, not as much, but it's pretty flat, right? That's something to think about, the wealth effect in terms of when people are buying homes. Is an asset, is the largest asset for the majority of households. When people see that price is going up, they're not too concerned to buy as much as possible. But when they think it's flat, or maybe even going down, the mindset changes a little bit, right? And that's something to keep in mind. I think we talked about, where's Rox Pollard, the psychology of buying residential homes. Maybe a course we'll roll out in a couple years at Coastal Carolina when our major gets approved, right? We got a minor, we have a concentration in real estate at the MBA level, and we just got the major through the department. The psychology of home buying would be an interesting study, right? Rates and builder confidence are improving, stabilizing. National Association of Home Builders was pretty negative throughout a lot of the pandemic because of prices, right? Cost to build. But they've been positive for the last few months. So that's an interesting turnaround, right? U.S. housing starts. So it's been declining for the last, probably since at least last summer. Single family permits, similarly, on the far right. This is from the summer, I think August. I just like the picture. All the orange is declining permits. Not that I'm negative. Well, maybe I am. Whatever. I shouldn't be. But it's a fact, right? All the green is where there was growth. With the exception of California, these are really small places. West Virginia's even on there. Everybody asks me, you're from West Virginia. Why did you guys grow? So I have no idea, right? Usually we don't, right? But the orange has been declined. It's all over the country, right? Horry County, single-family permits, another proof that we don't really move at the same timing as the nation. We had the highest year of permits ever, 6,918. I shouldn't say ever. I don't have 2005 or 6 on here. It might have been higher then, but we certainly didn't slow down very much. Georgetown, it's about a tenth the size in terms of permits. A little bit more difficult to see patterns in the data, but I have it up here. 363 entire permits last year. That's compared to, it was 6,900 for Horry County, just to give you an idea, right? Reflect a moment. Again, when we talk about inflation, my monetary economist friends like to say inflation is everywhere a monetary phenomenon. They don't care about anything else. I say, well, I have to understand and talk to people and help us all understand it a little bit better than just say it's just a bunch of printing money, right? I like to know what that means for each household. And when personal income went up nearly $5 trillion in the midst of COVID, you have to scratch your head and say, how the heck did that even happen? How the heck did personal income go up $5 trillion when we literally stopped the economy by law, right? And it was transfer funds, transfer payments. When you do that, and many, many fewer people are able or allowed or whatever to work and produce, you're going to have inflation. There's absolutely no question. Supply and demand imbalance is off the chart historically, right? And that's what happened. Which prices are more elastic? That's what we should be concerned about. Again, when I moved here from Atlanta in 2007, and I met with Buddy at E.F. Hux Consulting, and we would sit and look at his computer screens, and he said, I know this is going to drop. I want to know when, right? That's what he's interested in. And he wasn't saying he's talking to me because I knew the answer. I sure as heck did not, right? But we started looking at a lot of research, a lot of stuff. And there was a guy named Wheaton at MIT who did a study, and it was called Resort Real Estate. Does supply prevent appreciation? That study is still in my drawer, and I think about it all the time. When he first did it, it was on ski resort real estate at Loon Mountain, New Hampshire. I'm a big skier. I knew Loon Mountain, and I thought, wow, that's interesting. But the first thing I noted, those are condominiums, right? So all this, you have to think about all this stuff, right? But does supply prevent appreciation, and why? And then do we have a different factor that may keep our prices or our values supported because of demand that may not have been true in previous cycles or in other parts of the country? And I think our second home demand is an interesting dynamic. And it might be different today than it was from 2002 to 2006. From 2002 to 2006, the second home demand in a lot of ways was speculative, investment driven. Let's flip this, right? And it wasn't just second homes, it was third, fourth, and fifth. I'll never forget, I moved on a street of 12 houses. One person owned one of the most expensive houses and 4 others just like it and had mortgages on all of them, and it went under, right? And that story, it just reverberates through my mind because I know many, 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 many people like that at that point in time. And I lost money on that house, on that street, right? So the elasticity of prices for second family homes, usually considered much greater than the primary residence, right? When prices fall, those would fall faster and sooner, right? Because they're not necessary. But we should ask, and this is my positivity coming out, and maybe just reality from data, these second homes may not be just investment properties. The people want to occupy them eventually, right? And that's a little bit different, right? And when it's driven by 55 plus, they may have the intention of those being primary residents much, much sooner, right? So that's some light in that cloud, I would say. Labor force participation, this is my, as an economist, I'd say my pet peeve. I'm not a labor economist, but when you talk about employment, income, and population, you can't ignore the fact that our labor force participation has been declining for decades and significantly more so since COVID, all right? So a 1% drop in labor force participation in the United States is 2.6 million less people either working or looking for work, a 1% drop. And we have here, I think it is about a 1% drop in labor force participation from right before COVID to the present. We still haven't returned, and that's the concerning part. So we say, okay, most people say, well, that's the retirees, right? But that's not just the case. So on top is the 20 to 24-year-old population. The 20 to 24-year-old population has not returned to the labor market at the same level that it was before COVID. The bottom is retirees. They certainly have not returned to the level they were before COVID. Controlling for age. The 20 to 24, I always like to say this, because in my mind, I'm a professor, I think, well, those are college kids. They're staying in college longer, they're investing in themselves more. That's not a bad move, right? But that's not what the 20 to 24-year-old population is exclusively. There are people who graduate high school, go into the military, always. There are people who graduate high school and go right to work. There are people who go to 2-year colleges. There are people who go to get 1-year certificates, particularly today from Google or whatever it might be. So the fact that the 20 to 24 is participating at a lower rate is significant, right? And it helps also explain some of the constraints on productivity that we see today. The prime working age, 25 to 54, we're right back at it, right? That group has returned, and that's really keeping things pumping, that and technology. Employment level and growth, this is important also, is not enough to just recognize how many jobs have returned since COVID. It's how many jobs have exceeded the level that they were and on the trajectory that they would have been if COVID had not happened, right? So we are still, I'm going to just read this slide. In the 3 years leading up to February 2020, the U.S. economy added 6.6 million jobs. So to February 2020, we'd added 6.6 million jobs in 3 years. But in the 3 years since that, we've only added 3 million, all right? We've added more than 50% fewer jobs since COVID than the previous 3-year period. That's something very important to keep in mind for the economy. South Carolina employment, we are over where we were before COVID. North Carolina employment, a little bit better performance. It's 10 million as opposed to 5 million people. It's a bigger economy. The growth of transfer payments, I just want people to understand when I say transfer payments, that's unearned income that is either borrowed or distributed. That hit 34% of personal income that year after COVID when the programs came out. This chart goes back to 1930. In 1930, transfer payments were 1.1% of personal income. Then we hit about 11 to 12% from 1980 to 2000. Then we jumped to 18% in 2010. And if the injection sustained itself, it was 34% the year after COVID. And many people ask the question, well, that's surely going to go back down to where it was before that. But I'm not so sure, because generally these programs, they don't just end, right? They get extended, right? Things are created, people live off of those programs, meaning they get jobs in those programs. There are people running the programs, and they have the same goals that everybody in this room has. Grow your program, right? So they usually don't get pulled back. It sure as heck won't be 34%, but it'll be much higher. And so if income is coming from some other source rather than work, we have a productivity issue, right? Transportation and warehousing, looking at the different sectors. This one, I think we want to learn more about FedEx today, but transportation and warehousing, the entire logistics distribution sector on the back of technology has catapulted since COVID. That's nationwide, and we even see it here. Leisure and hospitality falling behind. This is the U.S. picture, has not returned anywhere near the level pre-COVID. What about us? This is 2021 summer. It's harder to get our quarterly data for small regions, but we had not even come close to returning where we were before. Leisure and hospitality is a big part of our economy here, and we struggle with the same issues as nationwide in this sector of getting people to work. And we see that as individuals. We see it. We see it in our long drive-through lines. At any type of fast food that you favor, the drive-through lines are extreme. There are hotels have changed the way they conduct business for cleaning and for all kinds of things, maintenance. So it is here as well as nationwide. Real GDP percent change, first quarter predicted 0.8. Right, so 2% growth has been about the last 20 to 30 years average. 3% before that. We had 2 successive quarters of decline leading up to the last 2 quarters, and most economists are predicting recession in 2023 sometime. Inflation. So the top series, the blue, is all items. The bottom is all items less food and energy. So the top went from 7 in December of 21 up to 9 and back down to maybe 6.5 in December of 22. And the bottom number just tries to pull out some of those more volatile food and energy items. But fortunately, we're seeing inflation pull back. But still, the question last week was, will the Federal Reserve continue to raise rates in the face of this interesting banking situation? Nothing happened for a week. The Fed increased the rate again a quarter point Wednesday, right? And then today we have more news on the horizon. So we'll just have to wait and see. Moving data, this is interesting data. This is North American van lines. Note, again from ROX, again, we had our advisory board meeting yesterday and had some fantastic people with knowledge come into the room and we're sharing information. This might have been afterwards, we're just standing around talking. And U-Haul data shows Myrtle Beach is the 7th fastest growing metro in the United States in 2022 in terms of moves that U-Haul tracks, right? North American shows, this is state data, South Carolina is, I believe, number 1. Yes, inbound states, South Carolina is number 1. Again, outbound states, we know them. Illinois, California, New Jersey, Michigan, New York, right? So our business model is on the slide. Leisure and hospitality real estate, again, the Sun Belt is lucky here. Hotels and beach destinations are the few positives, particularly business hotels in big cities didn't do so well through COVID and still. Golf has experienced a return, labor-leisure trade-off. For me, I actually did a consulting study for an attorney on a neighborhood wanting to destroy a golf course and turn it into homes. I said, heck yeah, that's the smartest thing you can do with your money, right? And so I did the study and said, ooh, no, that's never returning, right? Golf, I mean, come on. And so it takes too much time, right? The opportunity cost. Wrong. Since COVID, labor-leisure trade-off. Economists say there's only 2 things you can do with your time, labor or leisure. Since COVID, leisure has had a little bit higher preference than it did before COVID, and golf has certainly enjoyed a rebound. U.S. retail sales, inflation-driven. That's all you can say. That upward trend is much greater than any historical trajectory that you can go back and pull, right? And that is the price inflation from the injection of money, right? So it does turn out to be, real dollars recede for governments. There's higher costs in it for businesses without question, but watch for a pullback on the recession outlook in terms of spending, right? U.S. disposable personal income, again, the strangest slide that I've ever seen in my career is when we have a recession and income goes through the roof, right? It's just unusual, right? So we're still dealing with that in ways. And again, those programs, it just remains to be seen how those will unfold going ahead. Paradigm shift, already underway, so I'm shifting into my long-term views. Suburbanization, as an economist, a housing economist, suburbanization is a revealed preference. People like their space. COVID just said, absolutely, we like our space, right? And the Sun Belt is a place where suburbanization is the way development has happened, right? There's just no question about it. And so people move from the more dense environments to the more spread out areas of the country, and the Sun Belt is one of those. Retirement of boomers. E-commerce is even more part of our culture. Gen Z, which would be that 20 to 24 possibly, they are educating more, joining the workforce later, and maybe some other things. We won't say. But this has been happening. This is not news to us. Long term, we know what's been happening here. These are our strengths. These are what happened. This drives our economy. The real question is more of a short-term question. So the economy's teetering on recession. Many argue a shorter, more shallow one. Geopolitical risk is still present. Inflation is strong and continues. Fed tightening is not strong enough on its own, hasn't been strong enough on its own, and I think we saw a picture of why that would be. The quantitative tightening compared to the quantitative easing, not even close in comparison. Bank collapses warn of financial risk economy-wide. Hard assets, including real estate, a long-term hedge. I think that's my last slide. It is. All right. Thank you very much.